Welcome to our next episode of the Blend Evolve podcast. We are so excited to be here today to talk about the future of AI skill sets. Every organization is in the middle on the spectrum between these two things, either genuinely exciting AI demos or kind of disappointing results when you have to take something ultimately to production. The gap between those two things is not always really a tooling problem, but it can also be a talent and operating model problem. And so today we're going to cut through a lot of that noise. We're going to talk about the skills that really matter. We're going to talk about kind of the future of these skill-based teams and how we go from proof of concept to production level quality. And so I'm really excited to be joined here today with some of our additional Blend guests. We've got Erik, our head of data engineering. We've got Stephen, our head of data science, and Celia, our VP of AI engineering. Some really great thought leaders in the space. So we're going to jump in and start with what's actually changed over the last 12 months, because this AI is everywhere, doesn't really capture where we are today. So I'm going to toss it over to you, Erik, first. You're in the middle of this, and what has really changed from the last 6 to 12 months?
The biggest shift really started in the beginning of 2026 with the dawn of what we're calling agentic engineering, right? And this is really a shift away from a percentage of productivity improvement to engineering talent seeing a 10, 20, 100x throughput really coming about through the use and changes in how people are even thinking about using AI tools. Claude Code has shown us what we're able to produce now, with Anthropic kind of setting that benchmark of being able to produce co-work in a time period that was unimaginable and deploying that to millions of users. It's really just creating a higher confidence in what is possible in the future.
That's awesome. And, Celia, one of the distinctions that we've talked about is how it's not always just about doing things faster with all this new enabled tooling. We're actually doing things that were previously impossible. So maybe you could give us an example of what that looks like in practice.
Absolutely. So one of the things that is very easy for us to do is when we think about use cases, be it inside engineering, but also in what we're developing to clients, is to always go towards those, productivity enhancement use cases or business value propositions. But one of the things that we are seeing is that the type of capability that we now have, as Erik has mentioned, can open up the art of the possible and really allow us to think about things that were in the realm of impossible really before. So there's one type of something that our teams have been working with our clients that I think is a fantastic example that always gets a lot of attention. When you think about product development, digital product development, if you think about the ways that those products have been historically tested, you always have the humans as the testers, right? So even when our clients are working with agencies, the entire life cycle of that product testing will involve finding the different types of, let's say, of profiles of target personas that can do that kind of testing. And you can very quickly see that there's a limit to how much you can do if that's always going to be how you scale. The types of capabilities that we now have allowed us to really eliminate those limits. And if you think that you are, for example, a bank that has to launch the same product in multiple countries, multiple geographies, multiple jurisdictions, multiple regulatory environments, and you're able to design, these types of personas that will have a much broader set of input and ability to test those products. Chances are that by the time you get to a product launch, you will have a much stronger understanding of what's going to work, what's not going to work, and guide product design and product development adequately. So I'd say that is building things the way we have historically built. It would have been very difficult for us to be able to envision these types of use cases.
And, so Stephen, building upon what Celia was just saying, where do you think most organizations are getting stuck today in this shift? What's the mental model that they might be stuck in?
I love Celia's point about a lot of organizations are still sort of in the mindset of how they did it before. And I think, to Erik's point in the beginning, this age of agentic engineering is really creating sort of orders of magnitude acceleration in how organizations can build, but also in thinking about how they need to operate agents in their ecosystem as they go forward, right? Lots of organizations are still in this thinking of sort of, playing fetch with your dog, right? You send AI out to do a task, the AI comes back, and then I decide what to do next, right? Or if I'm developing code, I ask it to build some code, I wait for it to come back, and then I give it a task to do next. We really have to graduate to a place where we're thinking about agents working in parallel and doing these tasks in parallel. So whether that's a network model where the agents or the tasks that you're doing to code or build apps are talking to one another as they go through the process, or whether that's a parent-child type task where you've got a manager overseeing all the different child tasks happening out there. We have to land in a place now where a lot more of these things happen in parallel and happen a lot faster, right? And so I think one of the challenges now that's happening to a lot of organizations is they're starting to understand that humans now are becoming the bottlenecks in whether it's building apps, whether that's operating agentic enabled functions in their organizations, that humans may become, in an effort to have sort of humans at the controls. And of course, that's still a very important thing right now. But it's becoming where humans could actually be the ones slowing down the process as than before.
It's really incredible. We're talking about speed, we're talking about quality, we're talking about new transformation and way that teams are operated. So as we think about what do we need from people, it brings us to this new real AI skill set. And there's a lot of noise in the market right now around, are you AI enabled? What are you doing to become AI enabled? How's your team AI enabled? But if I was an enterprise leader right now trying to build a team actually delivering the skills that are really scarce right now, then what's our perspective on that? And Celia, maybe I can toss this over to you. You've talked a lot about this coder to builder and what it requires for somebody's day to day to actually be different and truly be AI enabled, and what might trip people up in that transition as they're thinking about their own future skill set.
And wearing the hat here, Caroline, many of us grew up to be, trained as software engineers, right? And one of the things that is it's easy to lose sight of is that sometimes we may have perceived that the act of writing code is actually the objective, it's the ultimate goal. It has historically been associated with a creative activity as well, right? So it's like that's your craft. Um, but if you think about it, it kind of never was the objective. The objective was always to build solutions, be those solutions for the consumers, right, or for businesses. Writing code was a means to that end, which is to solve problems, to build those solutions. So this is like when you think about it from that perspective, it's a very exciting area because right now we have tools that are much better at writing code than we are, and using those in the right ways, with the right workflows and with the right level of parallelism that Stephen was just alluding to, will allow us to finally refocus on the beauty. But that is a big shift. That does change your day to day, because it's going to mean that maybe you're going to be spending times in your workflow, more time in parts of your workflow that you were not before. So it requires us to have a deeper understanding of the actual business domain, the business problem. It We may be doing like a lot less handoffs from one function to another, because like one individual may be able to do a lot more, right, of that end-to-end workflow. So it is I think it does require like a lot of support, because you are changing in essence what the job looks like, and how you work. So that's something that we're taking quite seriously within our own teams, to make sure that we'll have those conversations and that we have the right type of support.
That's great. And we've talked a little bit about the changing skill set and the changing operational model. And Stephen, you did allude to earlier, this idea of a human is in the loop, or it's an AI to AI system there, or an AI sitting with the human system. So, tell us a little bit more about this idea of a control tower model where humans are overseeing this AI to AI system. We're working through these handoff chains, different approaches that enterprises can consider making.
Yeah, I think, humans become really orchestrators and become, multi-agent collaborators, right? And so they're working with teams of agents, right? And the teams of agents are performing all sorts of different tasks, are working together to complete those tasks. And the human is sort of orchestrating that entire team, right? And so that's why I said it's no longer sort of a sequential handoff thing or sort of a one-to-one relationship. It's really many to many, as you think about sort of how humans and agents need to be able to work alongside each other. A lot of organizations right now are, I think, trying to figure out, how do you balance a couple of different things in that model, right? So how do you balance, for example, the amount of oversight that you want humans to have relative to the amount of risk, or the amount of time that you're going to spend really adjudicating and overseeing those pieces? How do you actually make sure that your AI system has a feedback loop and has ways for continuous improvement and continuous learning, right? So that those systems are getting better. A lot of organizations are still sort of treating this as sort of a one-shot, big bang implementation, rather than sort of almost thinking of it as a living organism, right? That needs care and feeding and needs to continue to learn. And then I think, the last piece of it is really, how do you manage the escalations, right, around your AI systems and engagements? A lot of things sort of all channel to one place today. And thinking about, okay, what are the different levels of escalation? Who and when does somebody get involved, right, in that process? And being able to really sort of make sure you're not getting sort of an AI dump. And what I mean by that is you're getting just a dump of all the information, and it's not being curated in a way that a human can really interact and be efficient in that ecosystem. So, those are the kinds of things, as you think about sort of the human now working with that team of agents or working in that synthetic workforce, that I think, organizations really need to be thoughtful about, right, in sort of designing their approaches.
Those are some great examples. And when you pair those new use cases of how we're doing development work with, what Celia mentioned of, we're built in this age of writing code, but really it's about solution development. So, Erik, if I toss a question over to you around so what is technical fluency even today? What does it mean to be technically fluent in this new world of AI skills?
Yeah, it's definitely evolving, right? I think the most important aspect is going to remain. It's knowing what to build, and it's becoming how to describe what good looks like, right? We need to continue to think about how do we bridge from what is that non-deterministic input to the deterministic output, right? And there's a bit of a paradox occurring here. Engineers are going to be directly producing less code. However, code has always been a small part of really what the engineers are doing. They've been doing that bridging by asking those questions about what about this? What about that? And trying to make sure that there's a clear definition of what it should look like in the business user and the end output of the system. And at the same time, we see more and more people are going to be producing code with the use of various assistants to create that for them, right? And code has always been the way for humans to communicate and tell our computers what we want them to do and how to do it, right? So it's logical that it would become that bridge for translating the non-deterministic inputs that the business has into deterministic outputs that execute the process that we design.
So it's interesting because we're talking about coding and now that it's so easy to vibe code a solution, vibe code a demo, it's not just about the prompts, it's about that production discipline. But also when you can spin up a demo in 20 minutes, and then you feel like you have something incredible to go and show your team, the real differentiation comes from its ability to work, its reliability, its scalability. And so there's an interesting dynamic as we shift into this new world of development beyond it's a quick, easy thing that we can just spin out into what is really going to be that solution oriented thing that we're actually focused on developing. And so I thought maybe we could spend a second talking about why AI projects really stall after that demo. Because we can take all that fast coding capability, turn something out very quickly, but then we lose that scalability. So Celia, I'm curious on what your point of view is on that human in the loop. But how does that scale as we continue to build these demos and take things into scaled production? Because there's a lot of leaders that use this word of, let me have a human in the loop or human oversight. And they kind of treat it like a safety net, but I'm not sure that's the reality. What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, and I think we all know that it does not scale, right? To the point that we need. So I think there's been maybe like a phase one in this era of agentic workflow development, where we kind of use that as you said, as a safety net, and say, no, it's okay because we're going to have a human in the loop, in the end, or at some point in that workflow, that's going to fix everything, right? But when you think about what we just talked, I think Erik mentioned at the beginning that 10x, 100x, it's really incomprehensible that you're going to put like a human in the loop there and not think that that's going to become a bottleneck. So we have to think about it differently. And that's not to say that there will not be certain use cases where you're going to very much need that human in the loop. And I'll give you an example of we work with regulated industries, and there are certain things that today the regulatory environment of today dictates that only a professional that is licensed at a certain jurisdiction for to do this type of work can be the one doing that type of work, right? So obviously, as we implement solutions for those types of business problems, we're going to have to be compliant with what the regulatory environment dictates. But on the other hand, we have to think about this entire workflow end to end and put things in the right places where a lot of those reviews are automated. So when we think about the production of code today, to think that it's always going to be, from an agent developing to a human, and that one-to-one that Steve mentioned, you're going to go back to be the bottleneck and then be unable to speed up the full process. So it's going to take it's going to take us developing, thinking about those the portion of the review that will need to be automated in the same manner, and the portions of that workflow that need to be human led for very good reasons. I think we always talk, I think Steve touched on this too, like sometimes evaluation. So when we deal with the analysis of very complex documents, right? So historically, you're trying to see, okay, have models hallucinated? Are we having, when we have a non-deterministic type of output? So we do need, I think, in the process of in our frameworks and in how we develop, we need to be accounting for how do we develop different ways to perform that evaluation, so that we have more and more trust in those solutions. And because otherwise you just cannot scale with humans alone. You're not going to be able to scale to the point that we need.
You bring up trust, and that's such an important thing, because as we scale and a human can't always be in the loop in a one-to-one capacity with an agent, we have a lot of clients that say, well, how do I know AI is actually doing the right thing? And you talk a little bit about evals, so Steve, what's your take on how do we govern, how do we eval and make sure the AIs are actually doing what we want them to do in a trustworthy way?
Well, to your point, Caroline, we just can't celebrate the fact that the agent completed a task, right? We have to look at accuracy, We have to look at completeness. We have to understand if that agent or that AI is performing to that expectation. And that's really the critical thing about evals. It's saying, because I think, to Celia's point, if you're in a regulated industry, you might have that burden of proof to be able to show a regulator, hey, this is how the AI reasoned through this, or this is how the agent reasoned through, and this is how it produced the result. But also, I think just in terms of passing muster in the business environment, being able to demonstrate that that agent did what as intended or performed the tasks as designed, I think is really critical, right? And then be able to demonstrate that the agent is learning, that it is improving, right? And so, being able to do that really requires an approach that really considers evals from the start, right? And so it can't be bolted on as an afterthought. It can't be something that you think of at the end when people start to question whether or not the agent is working. That sort of thinking and sort of the mechanisms need to be built in the approach from the beginning, right? And therefore, what then happens is you increase those chances of success, to your first question, Caroline, of being able to turn a pilot into production, right? Is really having that thinking up front and having sort of that optimization and measurement mindset from the get-go.
There's the mindset, and then there's also like, what literally should leaders be doing differently as they think about building scalable solutions? So, let's take an example. Like if we have a CTO or an engineering leader who's 6 months into their AI journey, they've got some tools deployed, they have a few pilots running, what's the most important thing they should be doing differently right now that they may not be doing? And Steve, if you want to keep carrying us forward on that.
So I think the first thing to start with is, AI teams. So start with the people, right? AI teams aren't monolithic, right? So I think a lot of people are out there saying, I just need a bunch of AI engineers. Well, what does that really mean, right? It actually doesn't mean you need all of the same type of people. You need people who understand how to build evals and optimize agent performance and think about safety, right? You need people who understand context and MCP, right? And really thinking about AI and ML ops, right? And so you need, I think, just like any great team, you need different position players. And I think some organizations are just running out there because it is a bit of an arms race, right? People are out there running after AI talent. And so they're tending to recruit, I would say, monolithically, right, about that. So that's the people aspect. I think in terms of the, building out the capability, thinking about where do people slot in. If you're building, the term out there is the synthetic workforce stack and all the different parts in which AI is going to be in your organization. Who do you need at the controls, right, at each one of those parts of the stack, right? Who can be the people that can drive, whether it's, reasoning and knowledge versus orchestration versus ops? Who are the people that can drive that? So I think, where leaders have to think differently is it's not just about headcount. It's really about saying, okay, what should the stack be? And what should the different capabilities in the stack be? And then match up the people, match up how you're building the teams to that. And I think, one of the mistakes is sort of trying to run at sort of acquiring as much AI talent as you can. And perhaps the stack piece is either an afterthought or a secondary thought. I would actually encourage people to maybe flip those two.
It's the stack, it's the structure of the team. And Celia, for organizations that you're seeing in the day-to-day, where are you seeing mistakes that may be made, whether a team lead is trying to upskill or restructure their team, or take a look at that stack?
It is. I would say that it's probably going back to doing more of what we have always done, right? So we have always looked at upskilling or retraining as this is the curriculum, these are the techniques, or these are the technologies, and this is how we're going to do it, right? But a lot of what we talked about here today, like Steve just talked about this, that the composition of a team. We talked about that flip from the coder to the builder. So you're really talking about very like transformational change. In some cases, I think I like to talk about it as more of like an operating model change versus just an upskilling. You are challenging people to think differently, to do the work that to work differently to achieve the outcomes that they have been trying to achieve over the course of their careers. So I think those organizations that will be more successful are the ones that take a step back, think about what does this upskilling needs, to really look like. And I think one thing that we can even see for ourselves is that you can't just let's say focus on the engineers and not focus on the other roles around it, right? We can in building solutions, you have product managers, you have other types of you have designers, you have people whose jobs are also being impacted and changed in a way with the with the ability to use this type of tool set. So if we want it all to come together, we need to think about how do we work as a team, how does the new tool set and the new frameworks and the new ways of working play to each one of our roles, but also how do we come together as a team, and what's the new workflow, the new operating model.
You say that teams need to take a step back. And so, Erik, for you, when you think about shifting from that protecting of scarce engineering resource and a team leader thinking about how they plan, prioritize, and resource projects appropriately, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, so much of our traditional SDLC process has been focused on planning and protecting what is and optimizing the engineering capacity, which was the scarce resource, right? And we're starting to think about it in new ways, right? Just as we had a shift from a traditional waterfall to agile way of thinking and changing some of how planning works for a software and an engineering team, I think we're just in the early innings of figuring out how we can think about it in new ways, right? How we don't have to go about choosing which features to build, but potentially iterating on multiple versions of it. Being able to use feature flagging and test out which versions are best to validate the hypotheses that we're making and then move forward with the best one based on data-driven decisioning. This is going to really free up the backlog, right? What project have we not been on where there's always been a constant trade-off, prioritization, and lack of feature implementation? This is not any different than any other productivity revolution in a sense that we are going to have more throughput, more output, more features getting put into production, and us validating which ones work best. It's almost that we're seeing the opportunities in front of us to be able to rewrite applications when we see that the business is evolving and changing, instead of being stuck by a 10-year line of business monolithic app that we didn't have capacity to rewrite, even though we saw the shift coming. So it's a new era for how we need to think about engineering and even running our engineering teams.
It's an exciting new era. We're talking about transformation, but there's so much unlock and potential and abundance that can also come from this new era of engineering and data science and development. And so, to close us out today, I thought we could have a fun question and do a bit of a round robin. And for one thing that and viewer may be listening for today, what is one concrete shift that they could do in how they're thinking about AI talent, capability building that they can carry on with them as they move forward? And maybe Erik, will start it with you.
Yeah, I think you need to think in an AI first way, right? And in not thinking about how can it help me, but how can I do this with AI? What can it do in this process? And how can I make sure that I'm thinking about it in a what does the end product look like? How do I describe how I want it to work? And how can I use this to reimagine how it works entirely? Instead of thinking about AI as a bolt on idea, how can I re envision the entire process or application with AI?
And Stephen?
I think don't be in sequential mode, be in parallel mode, right? So don't think of things in terms of handoffs. Don't think of things in terms of one step leading to the next step. Think of a world in which it is really a dynamic flywheel, where things are working in concert together, where you have multiple processes happening alongside one another, coordinating with each other, and be thinking in that way to really get the unlock, right? So that you aren't creating sort of the human barrier in the loop or the human delay in the loop, but you're creating an environment where you get that kind of order of magnitude acceleration that we've been talking about.
And Celia?
I'd say that it is really, you talked a lot about, and I love that you said that we talked about this mindset of abundance, right? So I would say it's embrace this mindset of abundance, and that's very different because it's not that here's my current state process, is my future state process, and the roadmap to get from A to B. You can really free yourself up and reimagine how would I have done things, to focus on the outcome and you know and re-envision, reimagine how you could do things when in a world where you now have abundance of resources.
This future is full of transformation, whether it's you thinking about your teams, enterprises thinking about their entire technology stack and team, or you individually as you're learning, some of those new skills, bringing these new tools and productivity ways into your tool belt. But it's all a very exciting future that we can all lean into and, I think embrace together as we see this new era unlocked of AI transformation. So I really appreciate you all joining me here today. It's been a riveting conversation. And for those listening, I hope you'll tune in for our next episode of Evolve. Thank you so much, everyone.